Hello friends, welcome to another video of Game of Tech channel. Today in this video we are going to discuss few very important topics in Java. Those are identifiers, objects, class, packages, variables. In variables itself there are local variables, instance and class variables, and we also will discuss, we will learn these concepts, and we also will discuss interview questions being asked from this topic. So welcome again. I hope you will enjoy this video. This will help you to clear the Java related interview questions. Without further ado, let's jump into the topics. So the first question is, what is an identifier in Java? So an identifier is the name of variables or methods, classes, packages, or interpret anything is known as an identifier. For example, this package name, GOT example, is an identifier. This class name is an identifier. This class variable name is an identifier. I am an identifier is an identifier actually. And even the method name print is an identifier. So every variable names or method names, classes names, everything is an identifier. Having said that, let's move to the next question. Now, do you think can I identifier can be started with a digit? No, that is not allowed in Java. For example, if I start a class name with a digit, it is not allowed. And if I start a class variable name with a digit, again that is not allowed. Okay. The next question is, what is null in Java? Null is actually a literal. It is not a keyword. It's a literal like true or false. Okay. It represents the value. It represents, it says that, the value, the reference, the object is mapped to null. It means that reference does not exist. So it does not pointing to any particular object in the memory. So null is usually being used for representing empty reference to an object. That's the reason null cannot be mapped to any primitive data types like int or long or char. Any of the primitive, we cannot map null literal to that kind of primitive data types. Let's move to the next topic. Next question is, can we have more than one classes in a single source file in Java? Yes. If you see, this is a single file where I have two classes. One is home and the other one is game of text. Okay. Now the home is not public, but game of text is public. I cannot have multiple public class in one single source. If I declare so, it will throw error. So that is not allowed. But you can have a number of non-public classes in a single source file. Okay. Let's move to the next question. What is an object cloning in Java? Cloning is like, you create a copy of an object, and when you talking about copying an object, copy the entire state of an object, and you create another independent object from that reference object state. That is known as cloning. There are multiple ways to do this cloning. Having said that, let's move to the next question. Okay, now let's discuss how to implement cloning in Java. So to implement the cloning, we need to implement the clonable interface. Let's see an example here. Here we have class home and we implement clonable interface. This is a marker interface and there is no other abstract methods in it. So why do we need to implement it? Means we are, after implementing the clonable, we are overriding clone method which is available in the object class, and that method is already throwing this clone not support exception, and we will return super.clone method. We will call the super.clone and we will return this return object. Okay, if I click on this one, you can see it is a native method actually, and it is returning an object. So why do we need to implement the clonable? If we are not implementing, then if I call home new home dot clone, it will, if I'm not implementing that interface, it will throw clone not support exception actually. And if you are using clone, then we have to either catch clone this exception, or we have to throw this exception. So this is the way we are cloning in Java. So what happens when we are cloning means all these primitive variables that will be duplicated to the new object, and all other reference variable, like the reference to other classes and all, that reference address, that address of the class will be duplicated. The clone method actually doing a shallow copy of that object. That means reference name will be the whole object which is being referred will not be duplicated. Instead, their reference address will be duplicated. So if we want to duplicate the whole reference object inside a class, then we need to go for a deep cloning that we will discuss later in another video. So having said that, let's move to the next question. So let's talk about the system class in Java. So the system class is, you must be familiar with the system class, and there are a lot of useful methods and functions are available in system class, especially when you are trying to print something into the console. We always we always take help from the system class. Let's open it. What happens? What kind of class is that? When you can see it, it is there since JDK1, and it is a final class. So this sometimes you may get a question like a example for a final class, then it must be system class, and there are several others final class which is declared as final, but system is one of them. And there are other useful methods, system.out. So when you look at this out signature of the out function, let's search for it, or we can take it from here itself, and you see that it is returning a print stream. And if you are printing something, then it will be defaulted to console output. And there are ways to change this output instead of console to a file. Okay, that you can search it in the internet, and you will get to know. I'm not covering that part in this video. So that is what system class. Let's move to the next topic. Now let's talk about packages. So you can see it is this is the package which this class belongs to, and com got example. So what is package? A Java package organizes Java classes into namespaces, providing a unique namespace for each type it contains. Okay, so this is the namespace which is mapped to this class game of text. Okay, so this is very important to uniquely identify each elements, uh, uh, each classes or interfaces in your software. Okay, now do you think in this package, example package, it can I have two classes with the same name? No, that is not possible, because in Java does not support multiple names, multiple classes with the same name. Even you cannot create a one class game of tech and creating another interface with the same name. That is not allowed in Java, and it will throw error. And when we create a package, the same directory structure will be created in your hard disk. So having duplicate names is not allowed. Even the OS will not allow that. The next question is difference between class not found exception and no class definition found error. Okay, so this is very important question. I have faced this question from different interviews actually. And a class not found exception is something like, for example, if you are creating a JDBC connection, you create the connection using class dot dot for name. This is the method you are using to load the driver class, right? Oracle driver, something like that. Now, what happens is this: when you use class.forName, you are dynamically loading the driver to the JVM, right? So, what happens? Have you ever thought, if this driver class, this jar is not available in the class? So, if it is not available, or the class.forName is not able to find this particular class, then it will throw class not found exception. So you can see it's an exception. This comes from the exception. This is, so in short, class not found exception will be thrown if you are trying to dynamically load the class file, but it is not available in the class path. On the other hand, no class definition found error will happen. Suppose when you compile it, when you compile it, the class was available, but during the runtime, the class is not available. In that kind of scenario, this class no class definition found error would happen. And there are different scenarios. For example, when you compile Java, EE related jars might be already available in your class path, so the comparison would happen. But if you are in old days, when you move to that server, your application will be running the application server like a Tomcat or some other JBoss or application server, where that application server might not have that, some library which you used while compiling it. So you may get a no class definition found error at that time. So that is the difference between these two actually. And definitely this is an exception. Actually, it is extended from exception class, but this is an error which is extended from error class. Okay, let's move to the next. So, what are the different ways to dynamic class loading, or how to load a class dynamically in Java? There are certain cases, you may have to load the classes dynamically because, especially the driver class for connecting to databases, you would have used the driver class.forName, and the driver name will be given here. So the real question is, why do we do that? Because when we develop a design a system, as we want to make it, database shouldn't be, or driver or database shouldn't be uh, you know uh, hard coded to that code, because tomorrow if you change the database, we do not expect to change that change the Java code or driver name. That is not expected. So what we do, we load this driver name as a parameter, uh, like we give it as a parameter. We remove the dependency actually, and we will provide that driver name as a parameter, and we dynamically load that driver, right? So for loading such a to bring in such, how do you do that? Means you call class.forName function, and you provide the driver name here, then it will be loaded with JVM. And there are one more way, like class loader, and this is also providing a useful feature of load class. This is another way to load the class dynamically. And here it is eager loader. That means when you load it, it will be available in that JVM, ready to use actually, and it is lazy loaded actually. That means when you start, it will be loaded completely up uh, when you first use it. That is the difference. Let's move to the next. There are certain scenarios like this class.forName is capable to load the classes from your class path, or from your system. But in certain cases you may have to fetch the class from a network device, or from through internet. You may have to bring in that feature or the class through internet or some other protocol. You may need to use it. In that kind of scenarios, you can use custom class loader for loading the class. So when exactly the static variables load into memory? Suppose I have a class, there is a static variable string, static string name. So when will it be loaded to that memory? So the static variable, whenever the loads, home class is loaded to the memory, just immediately after loading, that static variables will be initialized or will be called. So it happens just after loading this home class into the memory. So that's the reason when you have a static block in your class, then that will be executed just even before executing the constructor or any other method. It will be loaded, it will be executed. And still there are different when you do programs, you will create a static block, and if if you want to declare or initialize something, like if you want to initialize some driver classes or something, you make use of the static block. That is the reason we are using that. Okay, let's move to the next topic. So the next question is, what is serialization and deserialization in Java? So the serialization is the process of writing an object into a file, or if you want to write the state of an object into a file, and later you read that file and reconstruct that the same state of an object into the memory. If you have such feature, such a requirement, or if you want to transfer a class through a network, in that kind of scenarios, serialization is required. That means when you bring in the serialization feature to a class, then your class is capable to store its state or persist its state. So how to bring in this feature is like there is one marker interface called serializable, and it's a marker interface. And once you bring in this feature, this implements this interface, you have that feature of serialization into that class which has implemented it. So if I create an object of home, and if I write that object to a file, you can definitely see all the state at which it has been written to the file. And deserialization is the reverse process of serialization. You can read it, read an object, and you can convert into a you can read a file, and this you can read the state of an class written to the file, and you can reconstruct that same last saved state into the memory. That process is called deserialization. So what is this static block and initializer block? The you can see this is an example of static block, where the block is having static keyword, and this is an example of initializer block. Static block will be called once that class is loaded to the system, loaded to the memory, and you can see when the class is loaded, immediately this print statement is printed to the console. But initializer block will be called when you are trying to create an object using some new keyword or something, and this will be called just before the constructor is called, and it will be called after the class parents constructor is being called. So when you try to create an object of game of tech, you can see this print statement is being called before any statement in the constructor. And static block is mainly used for initializing these static variables or something, but this static block does not have access to instance variables or methods. But if you want to have access to instance methods or variables, then you can have that access from initializer block, not from the static. So what is this object class? Object class is the base class of all other classes in Java. So when you open this object class, you can see there are a lot of very useful methods and we whole Java system has highly dependent on this object class. Some of them are like hash code, clone method is there, equals method will what's a indicate whether the same some other object is equal to this one, that is called equal methods. And this hash code is actually returns the hash code value of the object. And let's move going further. This clone method actually what it does, uh, mm, it basically returns a copy of this object. And toString method actually returns a string representation of that object. And there are a couple of methods like notify all, wait, etc. And these methods are methods of objects are all play a part in synchronizing the activities of independently running threads in the program. So these are all part of thread manipulation and the thread synchronization. What is shallow object copy? So the shallow copy or shallow cloning is, when we are overriding this cloning method, if you are implementing the cloning method, if your cloned object will copy only, the primitive values and the immutable objects, for example, a string, then it is known as the, what's a shallow copy. Okay. For example, if your object is having reference to another object, when you clone the object, if you're not, replicating that, reference to object, instead of replicating the state of that reference object, you are, just using the reference and, the same reference in your new cloned object, then that is kind of cloning is called shallow object copy, okay, or shallow cloning. So there are the other type of cloning is deep cloning or deep copy, something like that. And shallow copy and deep copy have both, having its own advantages and disadvantages. So this is called shallow copy. I hope you understand that. Implement the equals method correctly. Okay. So when we talk about equals method is part of the object class actually. And the objects class, that is like a utility class for object and related operations. This objects class is having a equals method. That equals method actually make use of object equals method actually, and all these equals methods are checking whether the reference is same or it is mapped to same object, their address is same. And even if I open the object equals methods, I can see that it is just matching whether the object reference is same. If both are same, then it will return a true, right? So let's move to the implementation. In order to do this, to implement this equals method correctly, we need to override the equals method, which is part of object class, which is the base class for every other Java classes, and we need to override that equals class. And the return type of equals method should be a boolean value, and it is a good practice if that input parameter is going to be an object method, because sometimes you may have to pass there will be cases like you need to pass the child objects. So it's better to use the object as the input argument type. Now if you look at this, first statement must be the objects equals method, or you have to implement like this, your this object is having the same address as the given object. If both are sharing the same address, then you can immediately return a true. Okay. Now next step should be like, the given object have a null reference, is pointing to a null. If that is the case, then no more matching is required. You can immediately return a false. Now go into the next check, where we do the class. Yeah, that's what I said. Sometimes if a child object can be given to equals methods as input object. So we need to check both the the objects we are looking for equality having the same class. So we take this dot get class and check with whether object dot get class. If both are same, then it is fine. Otherwise you can immediately return a false, saying that it is not matching. Now next thing, like we are typecasting the given object to the that reference object. And from here, what we do usual practice is like key fields or primitive or integer fields will be checked for equality first. This is the reason I checked whether the id field is matching. Here I made use of objects utility class, and I checked whether the equals, I used that equals method for that. And after typecasting the input object to that home object, I am using the home class for testing this equality operation. Then object dot equals, I am checking the the id value or primitive fields first for the equality. If both are equals, if they are not equal, then I am returning the false. Similarly, I go for the next field called name. Here it is a string, actually is immutable, and I again use objects dot equals utility method and check whether they are same. And at last I check whether the address, which is a reference object to another address class, and I check whether the this object address is null or not. If it is not null, then I check the given object's address is null or not. If that is also null, then I'll see whether I will basically call the address dot equals method. So if we have already implemented the equals method there, then that will be called. Otherwise it will be calling the object class, the parent class equals method. If that is not true, then it will return false. Otherwise I will return true. So this is one of the best way to implement equals method in your class. Let's move to the next question. Now let's discuss what is the difference between equals and compare to method. So equals method, as we discussed, it will just check whether two objects are equal or not. That means its return type is a boolean. But compared to, on the other hand, it returns an integer value. So that integer value ranges from negative, 0, or to the positive value, right? So what exactly, sometimes, while sorting an array of integers, you need to, not only, you just have to check whether the given number is less than the other number, or it is greater than, or it is just equal. Only equals method will not work for sorting an array, right? So it has to compare whether it has to be how difference is there, and whether it is higher value or lower value. So in that case scenarios, compare to will come into picture, and that will help us to sort solve most of this kind of sorting kind of issues. So compare to will return an integer value ranging from negative to positive, and the given value, when compared to the other value, if it is less than, the negative value will be returned. If both are equals, then 0 will be returned, and if it is greater than the given value, then positive value will be returned, right? And this compared to value is what I just mentioned, is for integer or other decimal values. So based on your logic or your scenario, for example, you may have a home class and you want to compare the home class with other class based on its ID or based on its length of the name. So according to your logic, you can define your own compared to implementation. Now let's think about when we override or implement equals method and compare to, does it need to be consistent? That means when you apply equals method, it should return true, and for the same object it should return 0 for sure. So if you have implemented in such a way, then that is a best good approach actually. It must be in that way. But in certain scenarios, or when you deal with objects, sometimes the equals method will return a true, but comparative will return some a non-zero value. Then and if you are using implementation of something called a tree set or sorted set, something like that, then there will be a sorting or arranging the objects in the collection will have some the logic will be ambiguous, and it may go in may not result in a good result actually. So it is always better to have a equals method and a comparative method works consistently. Okay. What is the difference between get class method and the instance of method? So this is one of the very tricky questions. I have heard this question being asked in several interviews. So let's discuss this question with a simple example here. I have a class called second and which extends the threads, and I have overwritten this run method. So in the implementation, it doesn't matter. Here I have anonymous class, which is implementation of thread class, and that it's called first class. Now if I print the first instance of thread, so I'm just taking the first is an instance of thread. So when I use instance operator here, uh, during the runtime, it can see that that's the instance of thread class because it is implementation of thread, right? And it returns a true, right? Similarly, if I print the value of a first instance of runnable, here also it returns true because yes, the thread class itself is extending or implementing the runnable class. So it's an implementation of thread. I mean, it's an implementation of runnable as well. So the first is instance of runnable, right? Now, when I take the class object and get the name of that first thread, right? It is showing my game of tech $1 because this is a class defined inside my main method, right? So that is the difference between the instance of and get class method. Get class will point to the exact class actually. And now look at this example, the second, which is I defined outside this one, and it is also extending the thread. And when I print that name of that method, then it has shown like example second, right? Now what happens when I when I check whether this is equals to thread dot class? Let's see here. Here you can see there is a compilation error, and this is because this expression will always return a false literal, right? Because it's a class of second actually. So this will always return a false. So that is the difference between instance and get class method actually. So this needs to be checked uh, in your when you override the equals method.
this has to be checked according to your scenario, your logic. There is no, there is no fixed rule saying that this one is better. It's up to your situation, your logic, what you are writing. Okay. Anyway, this keep in mind what is that difference between instance of and get class method. The question is, now we are discussing some of the important questions from being asked from variables topics. So let's talk about whether we can be access the a non-static variable in static context. So no, that is not possible in Java because a static variable is associated with or binded to a particular class. So in order to access a static variable, that class need not be instantiated, right? But when there is a non-static variable, that means instance variable, that will be available, that will be created once the class is instantiated, right? Once the object is created, then only the reference is available. But static variables, that will be available when the class is loaded by the JVM, right? So this sentence, you cannot access a non-static variable in the static context. So you need to have an object to be created for that particular class. So what is a transient variables in Java? So when you create a variable, for example, transient string I or name. So what does this mean? This means that when a class being serialized, suppose it implements serializable interface, and when the class state has been recorded to or write to a file or an object stream, this particular name will be ignored. That will not be the state of this variable will not be taken into consideration while writing this state of the object to any other medium or object stream. So it is just like when you return a JSON response. In the JSON we have some JSON ignore annotation is those who are working with JSON or REST service, they will be familiar with that annotation. It basically says it will be ignored while persisting the state. Next question can be like what is local variables and are they thread safe? Local variables are like that variables which is being used inside a particular method, right? It can be the parameter to the method also. For example, here if this constructor, these are local variables because their scope is exist only inside this particular method. Similarly, equals, this object is a local variable actually because its scope exists only inside this method, right? So this kind of variables is called local variables. And when the program starts to execute this method, the local variables will be available. Once the program exits from this method, after executing every statement, the local variables will be dissipated from the deallocated from the memory. So are the thread safe? Yes, they are thread safe because when the local variables will be created and they will be kept in a stack. There is a heap and stack memory associated with Java program. So when the local variables created, that they will be put into the stack. Okay. Now for each time when you consider an environment of multiple thread, every thread will have its own stack or local variable stack actually. So every variable which is instantiated by a thread, that will be particular to that particular thread. No other thread will use that particular local variables. So that's the reason we say that it is thread safe. Next, we talk about what is instance variable. Instance variable is something that is defined at the class level, but which is not static, right? That means in order to here you can see the string name is an instance variable because it is not static and it is defined in the class level. It is not part of inside any method, right? So instance variables will be active once instance of the class has been created. For example, if I create an instance of the class by new keyword, then I can access this name variable, right? So this is called instance variable. And are they thread safe? No, actually instance variables are not thread safe. For example, consider in this thread, actually suppose if I have a instance variable called name, and I can access this name equal to some value, right? And maybe multiple thread can define different values to this name. It is common for I can create n number of threads, and n number of threads having access to the same name, and only this particular method is running in parallel or in concurrent. So that's the reason we say that instance variables are not thread safe. Next, we talk about what is class variables or static variables, and are they thread safe? For example, if I create a variable called string name, if I make it as a static, this is called static variable or class variable. So in order to access this one, we do not need to create any instance. We can directly access by using this class. It's binded to the class level, not to the instance level, right? Are the thread safe? Of course, it's not the thread safe, because any object or any member can have access to this variable, and multiple threads can simultaneously change the value of this variable. So they are not thread safe or thread safe actually. And next question is like, can we have static variable interfaces? Yes, of course, we can have this from Java 8 onwards. And we can have the static variable in static methods in actually. Yeah, we can have static variable also, because in interfaces we can create a static variable. But by default, it will be public static final actually. So we can access it, or even you can create it set as a constants in interfaces. For example, interface constants. So I already explained in the previous videos. And if I create a static string value equal to some like constants, we can define it. By default, it is a public static final. So this is acceptable in Java 8 onwards. Having said that, I think we almost covered so many interview questions in this video. It's time to wind up. I hope everyone has enjoyed this one, and going through all these videos will give you a great level of confidence, and it will help you to clear core Java interview questions, and it will also help you to enhance your development skills, and your interview skills. And you will be getting a lot of new knowledge from all my videos. So keep watching, keep with this channel, and thank you for watching. Thank you for your time. Let's see. Bye bye.